This is an incredible new book. It's called The Rise of AI: How Machines Are Learning to Think Like Us by a well-known science journalist. And it's a really interesting look at where we are with artificial intelligence right now. I've been thinking a lot about this book because so much of what we do here at Lex Fridman intersects with what the book is talking about. We're going to be talking about this book a lot more in the future. But in today's episode, I wanted to just give you a quick preview of some of the ideas that are in this book. So let's start with the idea of how machines think. So there's this idea, which I think is actually captured very well in the book, that machines don't think in the way that humans think. They don't have thoughts. You quantate, ask a machine what it's thinking, and it quantate tell you because it doesn't have thoughts like we do. Instead, the way a machine thinks is by looking at examples and finding patterns in those examples and then generalizing from those patterns. And as you know, if you've followed the channel for any amount of time, this is exactly how we built large language models. We give them a bunch of data, let them find the patterns in the data, and then test them, and then once they've generalized from enough data, then we can ask them questions, and they can answer the questions based on the patterns they found. But what's amazing about this book is that it starts to explore the boundary conditions of this approach. When does it work and when does it not work? And as you might imagine, the answer to that question is not simple. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Sometimes it works amazingly well. Other times it doesn't work at all. One of the things that I thought was most interesting about the book was the exploration of how we can make these systems better at what they do, which is basically finding patterns in data and generalizing from those patterns. One of the ways that we do this, which is discussed in the book, is by giving them more data, more examples, so that they can find better patterns and therefore generalize better. But there's a limit to this. At some point, having more data doesn't help. Another way is by changing the architecture of these models, making them bigger, making them deeper, giving them more parameters so that they can find more complex patterns. Again, there's a limit to this. At some point, having more parameters doesn't help. The other way is by changing the algorithms, the way that these models learn from the data, how they find those patterns. And again, there's a limit to this as well. At some point, changing the algorithm doesn't help anymore. And so what happens when you hit those limits? This is something that's explored in the book. And again, the answer to this question is not simple. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Sometimes you can change the architecture, sometimes you can change the algorithm, sometimes you can add more data. And so the book does a really nice job of exploring the boundary conditions of this problem. When each of these approaches works and when none of them work. Another thing that I thought was really interesting about the book is that it doesn't shy away from the big questions. It doesn't shy away from talking about consciousness or the nature of intelligence, or what it means for a machine to understand something. These are really hard questions, and there are no easy answers. But I think the book does a really nice job of exploring these questions and at least planting the seeds for future discussions. I think this is a must-read for anyone who's interested in artificial intelligence. Whether you're a researcher, a student, a business person, or just someone who's curious about what's going on in the world, I think you'll find this book to be really interesting. Thanks for watching and for your generous support. And I'll see you next time.